I've just finished experiencing the Witcher franchise, and I've got some things to say. But before we get to that, let's go back to where this journey began.
Warning, spoilers for the whole Witcher franchise ahead.
When I was about to start working on this channel, I had a full-blown imposter meltdown. Was I even allowed to talk about fantasy books if I'd only read like 6 books in the genre? There were, and still are, so many series that I wanted to sink my teeth into. But they all look so huge. The kind of books that made me wonder whether I should be reading them or applying for a forklift license. And then I found the Witcher franchise. Not only did these look like bite-sized snacks compared to some of the chonkers out there, but I actually had some prior knowledge of this one because I had played the games. And by played the games, I mean I completed White Orchard 3 times in a row because I apparently have the attention span of a caffeinated squirrel. Either way, I had an advantage on these books, but there's something I'm not telling you. I had tried to read The Witcher before and failed because of one huge mistake. One that I didn't want to make again. So I reached out to a Witcher expert on one of the Discord forums I'm part of, and the conversation went a little bit like this.
So, you want to read The Witcher?
Yes, please.
And you have failed before, yeah?
Please, Your Grace.
Tell me, where did you begin?
What?
Where did you start?
Blood of Elves?
What? You come here speaking such filth. Why would you begin with the 3rd book?
It told me to?
No. You must begin with the short story collections.
The Last Wish and the Sword of Destiny.
Precisely.
Armed with my newfound wisdom, I was about to charge the library like I was on a quest for the Holy Grail. But...
Wait. One more question. What do you believe the series is about?
Oh, well, that's easy. It's about a Witcher called Geralt who hunts monsters, right?
Wrong! Well, right, sort of, but also wrong!
as it turns out, Geralt is only the lens through which we see the story. He's a secondary character in a larger narrative. Where a lot of people go wrong is that they think that the Witcher elements are a main focus of the book, but they're not, and that can often lead to disappointment. So, with my expectations altered and my knowledge updated, I headed to the library to get a hold of the first book, The Last Wish.
Right, so I've just come back from the library, got myself a couple of The Witcher books. The Last Wish came. Thankfully, I was worried that it wouldn't. I ordered them all, and I was worried that The Last Wish wouldn't come first, and it did. It's not that it matters too much because I already started yesterday on the Kindle, but here we are. But yes, I'm just heading off to a coffee shop now to do a little bit of reading, probably get about 20 minutes, half an hour in, to be able to get started on the Witcher series. So let's go on this journey.
I'd heard that the translation wasn't brilliant, but after sinking the first 80 pages, I had no problem following the story. That being said, there was one small problem.
The only downside at the minute is that I'm using the audiobook to listen alongside this, and I gotta say it's not the strongest audiobook out there, and the voice of Geralt just isn't the voice that I'd picture in my head. It really just does not work with the character that I've grown to know. So yeah, that's a bit weird, but when I tune it out, it starts to kind of like, yeah, it gels back to what I remember.
It was a minor hitch though, nothing to worry about. I'd finished the first 2 short stories, and while I enjoyed the action and the way the witch was introduced in the first one, the second did something a little different.
I loved it. I thought it was probably the stronger out of the 2 that I've read so far. I really like this idea that this guy who had been turned into a monster was actually almost a reflection of Geralt, because everyone thought this guy was a monster, and everyone thinks Geralt is a monster, and everyone's scared of both of them, and neither of them are actually that scary by the looks of things. And then, of course, the tragic twist on it at the end and the kind of turn of the fairy tale of it being true love that set his curse free, but it was a different kind of true love to what we're actually used to.
I was getting super excited for the journey ahead. In fact, I had enjoyed the first 80 pages so much that I said something that I don't usually say.
I think it's really addictive. I genuinely just want to sit down and read this book to the point where I've finished it, and that's not happened to me before. I've never wanted to read a book to the point where I don't stop until I finish it. I've been addicted to books, of course. I've done the page turning thing, but I've never been this addicted to a book to a point of like, oh, I need to go back into that now.
In hindsight, I think it's because the stories were so short and that made them super Moorish.
But right now, we're off to a really smashing start.
Another hour of reading later, and I noticed something a little strange. The type of thing that I don't usually look for in a fantasy book.
As the time's gone on, the world feels very much akin to like Shrek, in the fact that like it's really like feels like there's a level of parody there at times, and so I'm not fully into the world yet. Like I'm not immersed to the point of like feeling like this world is a real, genuinely functional place that could exist.
And while I'd usually want to be fully immersed in the world, I didn't see this as a bad thing. It actually made it more accessible and was probably the reason why I kept wanting to go back for more.
I feel like a kid again, like I'm a child opening up the first book of fairy tales and reading, Snow White for the first time and Cinderella and, that kind of thing. It feels like a collection of stories with a character in the middle of it all that's sort of summing it all up.
The stories themselves were handpicked to tell the perfect tale. Each time I went into this, I knew that I'd be entering another fascinating part of the world, which continued to enthrall me.
There is a level of, like, different perspectives are clashing in every single take of, like, every single short story. So the one with Renfrey was kind of like, we're offered this question of morality of whether Geralt should take out Renfrey after all the stuff that's been done to her by this alderman. And we're kind of left with this question of, is it right for him to then go ahead and take her out when she's, but then she's also going to be trying to kill him, and her actions aren't necessarily good either. So in the end, she leaves Geralt, no choice. But the question is, what is a monster? That is literally a question that keeps coming up in my head when I'm reading books. What is a monster? Who are the monsters in this story?
There was one concept that kind of blew my mind. It's called the Law of Surprise, and here's a little snippet of me trying very badly to explain it.
So it's kind of like, the guy asked for the Law of Surprise because he saved the Queen's husband. The child did eventually, as she grew, fall in love with this guy. As eventually, destiny fulfilled itself, and the Queen was okay with it, which I thought was a nice ending.
By the time I reached the end of the first book, I met Yennefer in The Last Wish, and things got super interesting. It was a fantastic meeting, and the entrance of Yen certainly made me want to read more, and I was not actually expecting to see her again for a good while. Though I was pleasantly surprised when I started to read Sword of Destiny. We hit the ground running with the bounds of reason. There was just one thing that was on my mind.
Maybe it did just go on a little bit longer than I expected it to. You were throwing Yennefer into the mix, and I was like, I want to know more about Yennefer. Meanwhile, we're trying to, put up with this hunt for this dragon. And I'm like, I'm less invested in the hunt for the dragon. I'm more invested in the secondary conflict, which is Geralt and Yennefer. And I want to kind of see how those two mix together and what is the story behind the two of them. Feels a little bit like The Hobbit, like they're moving and they're going to somewhere, which I actually really liked in hindsight. I really liked this feeling of you meet these kind of whimsical characters, there's a quest to go on, they go on the quest and they arrive at said place. I thought that was actually a really fun little format for that story. I was just a little bit distracted by what was going on with Yennefer and Geralt.
After my conversation with the expert, I had altered my expectations, and this was actually influencing how I felt about the stories, and I'm not sure if this was a good thing or not.
Most people who pick up the short stories would probably be more excited about the short stories because it's probably more what they were expecting, and then they get into the series and it's completely different. I think that's what I'm guessing, but I'm actually really keen to see other people's perspectives, which is probably a bit odd to some people because I feel like I think it's because I'm gearing myself up for it. I'm going in, I'm thinking, don't get too attached to Geralt yet, because they might throw a curveball where you've got to follow a completely different character, and I want to be kind of open to that.
But that didn't stop me from being glued to my seat, and within another couple of hours reading, cosily cuddled up to the cat while snow fell outside the window, I came to the end of the book.
That ending was so good. It works up to it so well. Like, you wanted Ciri and Geralt to like meet again, and how they were going to meet again, I did not know. I was so confused. And then there was that scene where Dandelion was explaining about the Nilfgaardians taking down Sintra, just as Geralt was probably going to go back of his own accord and pick Ciri up. And then, like, yeah, the Nilfgaardians sound absolutely terrifying. The war sounds really, really scary. The moment when he came home after asking Jurga for, like, something unexpected, and then Ciri was that thing. It was brilliant. Genuinely brilliant.
With high hopes for the setting of a bigger conflict and the spark of a longer form type series, I grabbed my copy of Blood of Elves. It was the moment I started reading this book that something very poignant about the Witcher franchise came to me. Something that I'm not sure that I'd fully digest until I got to the end of the full collection.
It feels like a book that isn't trying to be anything similar to anything else. It feels like it's trying to do its own thing. And so the chapters are really long, and at the minute they kind of feel like they're still short stories, but like in a more sort of somewhat structured format. So even though we've technically moved away from the short story collection, this isn't branded as a short story collection, even though it still kind of feels like it is. We are in a brand new world now, where Nilfgaard, the war has started this war, and it's all gone crazy, and we're not seeing anything to do with that so far. Really, I'd say the book excels so far more with the character work. Like, the time that we spend with Geralt, like, and Triss, and, you know, and Yennefer, and the bits we've had with Dandelion so far, which is not a lot. Times with Ciri, seeing Ciri try and figure certain things out, such as what does it mean to be indifferent, and not agreeing with Geralt for not taking a side, even though she then realizes in the fight that he doesn't actually take a side. He kind of assesses the situation by case basis, and so he's not affected by the war per se, but he is kind of like there to help if need be. I just find it really interesting, her thoughts on that. I'm already starting to gauge this idea that maybe Ciri and Geralt aren't on the same page. I get the feeling that she's quite strong-minded, and I think going forward there's going to be some kind of conflict between the two of them. I think she's going to get more and more annoyed by Geralt's choice. I think she's quite emotional, quite driven by her emotions, whereas Geralt, he claims he has no emotions, he clearly does, but like, he's very much good at sort of being stoic, and not bringing that to the forefront. Triss Merigold was a very welcome introduction to the series. I know we've heard little bits about her throughout the different short stories, but we've not heard loads, and now, you know, we're getting this idea. There's this weird love triangle between Triss, who obviously loves Geralt. Geralt is obviously in love with Yennefer. Yennefer's in love with Geralt, and Triss is kind of like the sideline character, unfortunately. But she seems like a really interesting character when she came along to Kaer Morhen. And we get to see a little bit of Ciri, you know, preparing, but also get to see Ciri bond with another female character. The start of the book, let's not forget the start of the book with Dandelion getting taken captive by those guys and then getting saved by Yennefer. That was really cool. I kind of want to know who are these people that are after Ciri. Even though these still sort of feel like short stories, we're getting good moments. I think this book is full of good moments. I don't necessarily feel like there's been a plot for me to talk about. Like, I feel like there's background stuff going on with the world. I'm over halfway through the book. Nothing's really happened, but years are passing. I feel like this book was definitely written to kind of give us an idea as to, like, Ciri's transformation from that 10-year-old that we meet in Sword of Destiny.
Nothing changed for the rest of the book, though I did really enjoy seeing Ciri's interactions with Triss, Yennefer, and Geralt. Plus, having this overarching intrigue as to why so many people were interested in her and coming after her did keep me interested. That being said, even though I knew that this series wasn't going to be fully about the witches, I kind of wish we could have seen a bit more of Ciri's time at Kaer Morhen and the training that she did, and I feel like we didn't really get enough of that. We spent so much time building up to this, only to have 2 or 3 chapters that centered around that area. Still, all of the time that she spent with Yennefer was very intriguing, and I felt that those two played off of each other really well. It felt a bit like we were putting in the reps so that one day Ciri could be this super awesome, powerful character, and for now we were just experiencing those all-important training moments. So ultimately, I accepted that Blood of Elves was just scratching the surface and was really excited to get into Time of Contempt. It was at this point where my journey with these books began to shift. I'd spent so much time letting them off because the translation might not be great, or it might not be a storytelling archetype that I am used to. The character work had been so good, which was starting to disappoint me because halfway through this book, I got the itch to DNF. I keep looking at the books ahead in the future and I'm thinking, what do I want out of that book? What is going to happen that is going to change my mind and make me go, oh, I love this? And I don't know, I don't really want people to be out there watching this and being like, he just doesn't get it, he just doesn't get it. I just don't know what's at stake. I just want to know more. I want more out of this plot. Right now, I'm getting good characters. I want to say good things. It's frustrating me that I'm not saying good things. But I'm going to get back into it and I'm going to hope that good things come along because, you know, there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of potential here, and okay, I'm gonna go. I don't want to keep whinging. This isn't meant to be a moan fest. Little did I know that I jumped the gun because I'd stopped reading just before something really big happened. Something that totally changed the way that I saw the book and saved it from a DNF. I think this is a really good example as to why I shouldn't stop reading the moment I start to feel a little bit disconnected. Because in the next chapter, there was an attack on the lodge, and we were left wondering what happened to Yennefer and Ciri. This made me so excited to find out what had happened, and in the end, I came to a realization. Sometimes I actually find myself wanting to read more Ciri, and they did an amazing job of making me wonder where Yennefer was, where Ciri was, and then when we found Ciri, it's actually left me with more questions than answers, because I don't know how Ciri got to where she got to, I don't know where Yennefer is, but then we are thrown into this story of survival. I think it was nice to see Ciri finally start using some of the stuff that she's learned, although I want to see more of Ciri like using this stuff, and I feel like we've had 2 books now where she's been trained by Yennefer and obviously by Geralt, and now like we're starting to see a little bit of that come to fruition, and then where we left it as well, where she wasn't with either of them, that's so exciting to me. I can't wait to see. I'm actually really genuinely feeling excited to see what happens next, because something actually happened in it, and I feel like that's what was going on. We were getting a bit clogged up with too many training scenes. For now, I was ready to just embrace the movement in the plot and pick up Baptism of Fire. The way the previous book ended meant that all I wanted with this next one was to find out what was going on with the rats. But the author was preparing to starve us of time with Ciri, meaning that we didn't actually get that many scenes with them. We got a couple of interesting bonding scenes, but nothing that was going to move the story forward. To make things even more confusing, a new Cirilla had entered the story, an imposter designed to fool the Emperor. But it wasn't just the Emperor. Geralt also thought she was in Sintra, which stressed me out to no end. I read through the whole book thinking, what are you doing? You're going the wrong way. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. During my first couple of hours reading, I realised that this was a Geralt-centric book. We were introduced to new characters like Milva, Cahir and Regis, and a fellowship was starting to form. Dandelion along the way, and I know it's Dandelion now. I went back to Dandelion, but now it's Dandelion. I know it's Dandelion, okay? It's Dandelion from here on out. Got Milva, who, by the way, I really like Milva. I think she's quite an interesting character, quite fun, and I'm not really sure what her prerogative is, but I am enjoying her being part of the team, as it were. And I'm enjoying having a team at all. You know, these little moments of downtime. I think if there's one thing that The Witcher excels at this point as a series, is giving us moments of downtime with different types of characters, and being able to letting us to see the vast level of areas that there are in the world. It is a very big world, and we do get to see a lot of it, even though it doesn't have a map, which is quite interesting. I think it not having a map kind of allows the writer to do, whatever, can go as far as he wants. At this point, I was really enjoying the book. Baptism of Fire had some of the most fun scenes in the entire franchise, and the introduction to these new characters kept me smiling throughout, but something was amiss. I keep looking at that final book and I keep thinking, what do I want to happen at the end of this story? What is it that I'm excited about? Ciri's journey? Ciri's growth? I'm excited to see where and who Ciri ends up becoming by the end of this journey. I think Ciri's journey is probably the thing that makes me want to read on the most. I'm not necessarily sure what I'm excited to see about Geralt. I mean, him and Yennefer getting back together, figuring out where Yennefer actually is, what she's doing, what part they will all play in the overall plot. But I also feel like I don't quite know what Geralt's mission is. I know he wants to find Ciri, I get that, but then he did find Ciri, and then what did he do? He tried to train her as a Witcher, and then he gave her over to Yennefer and trained her as an Enchantress, and then obviously something went wrong and she's been taken again. I don't know what these people want with Ciri, really. I know that she's got the blood of the elves running through her. I know that she's got some kind of, if she's an Enchantress and a Witcher, that's kind of like something quite unique, but I'm still not totally sure why it really matters. I know that there's some kind of political thing, but haven't they kind of got over the political thing now by having someone pretend to be her? They no longer really need her, do they? So, unless she was going to come out and out the person, which I don't see her doing anytime soon, because I don't think she actually enjoyed being royalty at all anyway. So at this moment in time, while I am kind of into it, if that makes sense, like it's not like I'm wanting to put the book down, I'm also really confused as to what it wants to achieve. So in short, I had no idea what I wanted from the final book, but something kept me reading, and then I found this quote from Dandelion that pretty much summed it up. To put it another way, being in motion is everything, the goal is nothing. And that, to me, sums up what my complaint was about the plot of this series, is that there was no goal, but we are in motion. It is true, we are constantly in motion. It's never that we haven't got something that Geralt is doing. He's doing things, but there's never felt like an overall goal. This book has changed that. The fact that he had a goal to find Ciri has really changed the way this book plays, and I've kind of understood everything that's gone on based on that one simple goal alone. While I wasn't given the Ciri scenes I had been craving at the start of the book, I actually found myself quite surprised. I thought it was a step in the right direction. I think we're finally starting to move. I feel like I'm glad that I've put the time in to learn about these characters, because, I think the found family trope in here is just really, really fun to read. There was a lot of like experimental stuff going on with the writing, and I don't quite know why, because it's very inconsistent. So, but no, in chapter 7, I really liked the bit when, we were like, there's something wrong with Milva, what's wrong with her? Oh, okay, she's pregnant. And it was sort of delivered in such a way that made me really excited to find out what happened next. The time had finally come for me to be reunited with the rats. I was ready to go to the Tower of the Swallow. I am 161 pages into the Tower of the Swallow, and so far it has been the hardest book to put down, but the most excruciating one to read, because of the brutality to Ciri. I am really not enjoying that, but at the same time, I kind of understand why it's got to be there. We can't, I've been hoping that Ciri will be okay throughout this story, and she's really getting put through the trials in this one so far, and I found that really difficult to read. So a few things that I want to kind of unpack about Ciri. There was one particular thing that is a bit of an elephant in the room that I haven't actually spoken about, because I was unsure, based on the translation of the original scene where it all started happening, as to what was actually going on, and I had assumed that some kind of thing was going on, but I didn't really want to say anything in case that I'd read it kind of wrong. But no, it turns out I was right. So Missel and Ciri's relationship is a complicated one. It was a horrible scene, having, now knowing what it was, that first scene when they first got together. I feel like Missel almost stands in for Geralt and Yennefer, but then takes advantage of that position with Ciri. But from Ciri's point of view, that's her first love, and she cares very much about her. So the death of Missel was a very sad one indeed, because
you know, it from the point of view of Ciri, that was someone that she was in love with. So that was really difficult to read, especially like the way that Bonhart treated the rats afterwards. Really, really harrowing stuff that's going on with Ciri. And I think the one thing I will say is that I really like that we started off the story finding Ciri in an absolute state and trying to figure out how did she get to this point, because the last time we saw her, she was with the rats having a great time.
This one was a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it had some of the most gripping scenes of the franchise so far, but on the other, well,
the way that this author lays out information can sometimes be really jarring, and we maybe meet too many people along the way to the point where I can sometimes get kind of confused. I am still holding out hope for things to get better from that. However, right now, I've enjoyed the fact that this book is centered around Ciri and that we've got to see kind of what she's going through. I think I just need it to nail the landing now. I need it to kind of give me some kind of proof that she has grown as a character. I think a year has passed since this, or maybe not even a year, she said 30 days that she's been talking to the dude. But there was a different bit where they were talking about it as if it was a year had passed. This is what I mean. There's so many different, like, elements to this that, like, sometimes I can get lost with the timeline, the portrayal of the timeline. So that can sometimes get in the way of my reading experience, which kind of sucks because there's a lot of good things.
Tower of the Swallow did not disappoint me in the end. The scenes on the lake were some of the most badass that we've had from Ciri so far, and it made her kind of feel like Batman or something, which was really good to watch. I really do think she deserved to have that level of power after everything that she had been through in this book and all of the books before it too. Now, I spent a lot of time wondering what I wanted out of the final book. And at this point in time, I just knew that I needed Bonhart to pay for his crimes, and I was totally gutted that he hadn't had the same treatment as everyone else at the frozen lake. So I just hoped that something was going to happen, and he would get his comeuppance in Lady of the Lake. After reading what I had considered the best book in the mainline series so far, I had really hoped that we would follow up with the scene where Ciri goes into the Tower of the Swallow, but instead I found myself saying,
I feel like we're just tracking too much right now. Too much is going on, but not enough relevant things are going on. Or maybe someone will argue that they are all relevant, but the three things that I want to hear about, three people, are Ciri, Geralt, and Yennefer. And I know I'm not going to get that in the next book. I'm just going to accept that that's not going to be how it goes. I am going to keep following this story. I'll let you know how I feel at the end. But right now, I really want to love it. But I don't.
I continued to read the book, determined to crack the code, to understand why everyone I have spoken to adores this franchise. I wanted nothing more than to cheer this author on, to feel something towards this particular book. It was so complicated. I didn't hate it, I just didn't love it.
I'm now on page 300 of The Lady of the Lake, and the last line that I read kind of sums up how I feel about this particular book so far. It's, I'd like to know what all this is for. What's the point of it? I'm not sure if I'm the problem. I should maybe be smarter and get this. But at the same time, I'm spending the vast majority of my time reading this book thinking, I only care about Ciri, Geralt, and Yennefer. But Ciri's journey, she wants to get home, but we keep bumping into random scenes. Like when she bumped into the old dude who attempted to do nasty things to her, which I won't name. But thankfully, he didn't manage it. Glad that she stopped him. That wouldn't have been nice. Not sure what the point of the scene was.
As I headed towards the end of this journey, the reading felt like some kind of endurance test. I was almost convinced that what lies on the last few pages was going to alter my perspective somehow. Page in, page out, nothing seemed to happen. Then I reached chapter 9, and something clicked.
I finally started to realise the reason why I'm reading this book, and some of the stuff that I wanted to see, that I'd kind of somewhat forgotten that I'd wanted to see, is starting to come to fruition. Now, having Ciri take out Bonhart was so good. I think that there's been a really good job of setting up villains in this book, that these books in general, they're just horrible, nasty people, and there's just nothing nice about so many of the villains. Like, literally, I don't think any of them are redeeming in any way. When you see them get their comeuppance, like with Bonhart and Vilgefortz, it feels very, very good when you get to that point. Unfortunately, we did lose a few people. I was very sad to see Cahir go. Very nice to see a bit of his backstory, a little bit more about him, rather than just being the guy who wanted to save Ciri. Like, knowing a little bit more about him, that was really cool. And that's one of the things that I really like about the use of the timeline thing, because I am so mixed on how the timeline stuff works. I'm so mixed on whether I like it when we jump straight ahead to the future and we see this old man and it's Yara and he's, speaking about the war in past tense. In a weird way, I kind of like that, because it's like, well, we get to see what it's like in the war, and we get to see what it's like after the war, and kind of like, that's kind of what war does. It leaves everlasting, stories within people. My granddad, he fought in the Second World War. He was full of stories of that war, and that kind of reminded me a little bit of that. I kind of like that, but I also think there's too much of that, and it kind of gets in the way of me enjoying things. And unfortunately, I think I would have enjoyed it more if we had 2 or 3 characters that were going to be leading the war, as it were, who we were following, that we really cared about, rather than just so many different characters that, it's hard to tell how many of them have appeared previously. Some of them have, some of them haven't. But either way, I get the reasoning. I get that it's like, wars are big, and it definitely made it feel more big and more epic, and you saw loads of different snapshots, and obviously like cut between that and then of someone telling the story in the future, and that kind of like device that has been used several times now. I was very sad to see Cahir and Angelim go. And in particular, Angelim, I think she's such a lovely, fantastic character that reminds you a little bit, got a bit of the flair of Ciri, and then to see her die in Ciri's arms was super duper sad. But yeah, that whole chapter was just like everything that I'd been waiting for to get to that point, and I'm really pleased that it did come together like that, in a way where I started feeling excited again. There was some excitement going on. And then, of course, the big twist about Emir and him being Dooney. He's actually Dooney, and he wants to continue his the destiny or whatever by having a child with Cirilla. And despite it being slightly messed up, it was an interesting reveal. And then his choice to actually let her go said a lot about that character, even though we've been kind of built up to see the Emperor as like this evil, nasty person. He's actually, unlike Vilgefortz and Bonhart, he seems to have some kind of morals about him. So that was kind of interesting to see. And the crazy thing is that all of this kind of feels like it's bringing things to an end. Like there's a conclusion to all the things that I wanted, yet somehow there is still 115 pages left in this book.
It took me another 2 weeks to get through those 115 pages. Everything that I had wanted to happen had already happened. It felt like a satisfying enough ending, so I procrastinated picking the book up again. But when I finally did, I was very glad that I had. I got to see what happened to Dandelion, and then there was that whole sequence where Geralt died, and then didn't. Ultimately, when I got to the end of this book, I felt like I had come to the end of the journey. But I still had one more left in store. Season of Storms. The prequel novella seems to be set anywhere within the short stories after having met Yennefer. And I didn't really think this worked for me, because I feel like I had made the mistake of reading on, as when I picked this one up, I kind of felt like the Geralt I knew had grown past this, and it was very jarring to go back to where he once was. And as a result, I didn't really enjoy this book, but I do put it down to me, and if anyone is thinking about picking up this series, then I am going to highly recommend to them that they read this one either after The Last Wish or after Sword of Destiny. Despite my struggle reading it, there was one key thing that I picked up from this story.
I understand why The Witcher works so well as a video game, because the books kind of feel like Geralt is going on so many side quests. I never think there's a real goal at the heart of the books.
But that gave me an idea. What if I played The Witcher 3 to completion? Would that change my view on the story? I've just finished experiencing the Witcher franchise, and I've got some things to say. I'm going to do this by using the Rambler rating system created by Tutor Ramble, because I find that is the best way for me to break down my thoughts. However, I'm not going to talk about prose, because the prose in these books was a translation, and I just think it'd be unfair for me to judge the prose of the author based on the translation, so I'm just not going to talk about that. But I am going to start this discussion with characters. There are a lot of characters in the Witcher franchise, and you actually see the point of view of quite a lot of them, so it's interesting to get to grips with who they are. However, instead of talking about every single character that appeared, I want to be focusing mainly on the ones that captivate me the most. Obviously, Geralt is going to be one of the opening people to talk about. He was a great character, much more deeper than the surface level version of him that I have seen in the past. I really like how philosophical he is, how thoughtful he is about like the different things that he does. I like the fact that he doesn't just judge people straight off the bat. He allows himself to understand them before deciding whether they are good or bad. I actually find him to be one of the more compelling characters in the series, and I can kind of tell why most of this is followed through the eyes of him. So I actually think Geralt is a very, very good character, and he's not just some random monster hunter either. He's got a lot of nuance to him, he's got a lot of tragedy in his backstory, and he's also got a lot of love to give. Like a lot of love to give. Sometimes maybe too much love to give, but still he cares very deeply, and he's got this problem with the fact that he has to feel these emotions. He's like, I don't feel emotions because we don't do this, but he does. He very clearly grapples with emotions, and I think that's very relatable, and I really enjoyed reading Geralt. Moving on to Yennefer. Yennefer was wonderful and mysterious and had enough sort of about her that was good that I really liked, but there was also a lot of shades of grey to do with Yennefer, and her connection with Geralt was very interesting and probably one of the things that I wanted to see the most of during the series. Of course, I love the way that she is with everyone else as well. I just find that when Yennefer was on the screen, I always kind of felt like she was in some kind of control, and there was a lot of detail there that I feel like we never really got with Yennefer. We never really cut beneath the surface, but this connection between her and Geralt was very interesting to say the least, and obviously there was always the question as to whether they were genuinely drawn to each other, or whether it was down to the last wish that he had with the djinn way back at the start. So yeah, I think maybe that's where I'm at with Yennefer. I think she was interesting when she was on. I actually loved her interactions with Ciri because we got to see an alternate element to her. She's made some really bad choices in the past, and she seeks redemption for them, and I quite liked that about her too. And then of course, you bring us to the third of like sort of the main trio is Ciri. I think Ciri was probably the best character in the whole book series, franchise as a whole. She is great. You get to see her go from, you know, being this young 10-year-old that doesn't know anything about the world to then learning very horribly about the world and becoming her own person by the end of it. And I absolutely love the coming of age journey. Probably the best element of this franchise is Ciri's coming of age journey. And then obviously we have a plethora of different side characters that I really liked. Obviously I like Dandelion, and I know I've called him Dandelion and Dandelion a few times throughout this whole book, throughout this whole video, but I apologise. Whichever one is the correct one, I really liked him. I thought he added a good level of comedy where it was needed, because sometimes it could be quite a grim story. Milva, Regis, and Cahir were a great welcome introduction in book 5, and I actually would read an entire book series about Regis if there was more detail on him, because I think he was one of the most underserved characters and probably one of the best side characters, and I would have absolutely adored seeing more of him. So if the author ever wants to write a bit more of Regis, I would be totally down to read a bit more of that. And then, of course, there are so many others that come to mind, although Bonhart is probably the best villain out of all of them for me, because he did some of the most devious, horrible things, and I really, really he kind of like the need for him to have comeuppance was something that kept me reading towards the later half of the series. So I decided to give characters a 3.9 because they were genuinely really good and probably the best element. But let's move on and talk about the plot. I don't need to talk about this too much. I've ranted about it already far too much in this video, but if there was one thing that really let this entire franchise down, it's the way that it does the plot. I just could not get on board with it. It could be a me thing, but I think even the basic of like knowing the character has a goal and needs to get somewhere, that was really lacking for me, and so I don't want to go on about it too much because you've already seen me rant about it, but I gave plot a 1.8. The world just didn't stand out enough for me. I really wanted to get more from it, and unfortunately it felt very surface level. There was no map, which meant it could literally be limitless, and I didn't know where anything was taking place ever, so that was really frustrating, and I wish if there was a map, maybe we'd be able to understand this a little bit better. But also, the world, because it started out being a little bit like inspired by different fantasy stories and almost being a study as to what fantasy stories would look like in the real world, like real medieval world. For me, it just ended up looking more like a parody, as I already said, and I remained once removed throughout the entire run of it. So while I don't hate the world, and I can't say the world ever really put me off reading, I also wouldn't say it was much to shout home about. So I have to give it a 2.8, which is just a little higher than the halfway line, because it wasn't terrible, it just wasn't brilliant. Emotional impact is a difficult one, because there were a few moments throughout the story where I was genuinely jumping for joy, and particularly in Tower of the Swallow, I was really hit hard by a lot of the stuff that went on in that book, and yeah, it was probably the one that made me feel the absolute worst. So there was some kind of emotional impact along the way, but those moments were quite few and far between, so I can't exactly give it like the highest of highs. And I wasn't exactly jumping for joy. It was like an inward, yeah, but it was inward. It wasn't like I've definitely jumped for joy a bit more in other books, and I've definitely fully felt immersed in the emotion of other books. And I think part of that was down to some of the choices of the storytelling again, like, for example, knowing that she was safe with Viscotta throughout the whole of Tower of the Swallow really took a lot of the tension out for me. So I wasn't really jumping for joy, because I was like, well, I know it's going to end okay, and I wasn't feeling tension, and I think feeling tension is important if you want to actually feel any kind of emotion in the end. So, yeah, I would give it a 2.8. Thought-provoking. I did like the themes that were discussed within these books. I really liked the monster theme of who is the monster? Is it Geralt? Is it the monster that he's hunting? Is it the person that hired him? There are so many different monstrous sides to so many different people in this franchise, so I really enjoyed that area, but as time went on, I feel like the theme got a little bit diluted, and I couldn't really tell where we were going, so it kind of got lost for me. So the thought-provokingness got a 3. Because it was good, it just didn't maintain itself throughout the whole series. And granted, I am rating an entire franchise right now, so like, the different books might have been different, but I felt like it needed to be done all as one. So I rated thought-provoking a 3. Which meant that altogether, I felt like the whole Witcher franchise was 2.9 out of 5. It wasn't too disappointing, it just wasn't as enthralling as I really wanted it to be. And you know what, sometimes I think I would probably have stopped reading if I wasn't reading at the speed that I had been going, because when I chose to join BookTube, I understood that I was going to need to read just a little bit faster, which is why I decided to teach myself how to speed read in 24 hours, and you can actually see the results in this video right here, so don't forget to check out that one next.